It's starting.
Thank you.
And it's live.
Assalamualaikum everyone. Welcome to the Indigenous and Muslim Education Seminar. We're just going to give a few more minutes before we can officially get started. Jazakallah. Just 3 more minutes, everybody, and we'll be beginning. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome everyone, Aneen, to the Indigenous and Muslim Education Seminar. We are going to begin our presentation, our seminar, with the recitation of the Holy Quran, which is going to be done by Yusuf Abdullah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. I seek protection in Allah from Satan the expelled, in the name of Allah the most gracious, the most merciful. Those who believe be upholders of justice, testifying to Allah, even if the injustice is from yourselves, your parents, or your relatives, whether rich or poor, Allah is better taking care of both. So do not follow your wants lest you should digress. If you twist or hide the evidence, then Allah is all aware of what you do.
Jazakallah Yusuf for that beautiful recitation. So my name is Zainab Serveri, and I am going to proceed the seminar with a land acknowledgement. Myself and my team members have conducted the work that we are presenting here today at the seminar on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee nations. We need to be aware that the first peoples who walked on this land walked so very gently and walked lightly. They had helped the European settlers to be able to, and had shared their knowledge, expertise, and experience for them to be able to survive at times what was when a very harsh climate and deadly terrain. I myself, my family, and I believe your families also, would not have been here had it not been for the first peoples to share that expertise. I can only hope from this seminar, myself, and maybe from you also, my hope is that we can learn about the nations and what their life circumstances are now. So a little bit of background as to why this event is happening, the seminar, and what's my thought process behind it. Essentially, it's all about timing. In the end of May, when news of Kamloops started to come out, I was honestly avoiding the news because I knew that I could not take it. I would not be able to handle it. But then what happened? A few days later, early June, the attack in London happened. And the community, specifically the Muslim community, went into a shock and dismay, including myself. And the next several days, I was trying to process some very difficult feelings that how could I have loyalty, a trust in, and love for a place, Canada, where the innocent are getting hurt, let alone killed. There is Yumna from the Afzal family, a 15-year-old, and of course, the grounds of the residential schools as they are beginning to be uncovered. And so processing these very difficult feelings for several weeks was a challenge. And I had to think to myself, how can I channel this grief and anger in a productive way that we can come out stronger from this? And so this idea was born that let's try to find the commonality of how we can protect our children, regardless of what their faith is, regardless of what their race is. So I am looking forward to how we spend time with hearing from the speakers today. But before I'm going to go on with that, I do just need to share with you a few matters. Bear with me as I briefly load up the slide. Sorry, trying to get to the next screen here. Okay, so I'm sure you already know, but the content in this seminar is probably not going to be easy. And I request you that only the ears that belong to 12-year-olds or older are going to be listening to this. In the event, God forbid, but in the event you are triggered and you need to reach out for professional help, please take a screenshot of these numbers. Okay, so before I can present the speakers and we can learn from them, my team and I actually would like to learn from you. We're going to do something a little bit different for whoever is on live. And I'm going to ask you to please take out your internet browser, either from the same device you're using or from a device that's next to you. And Chief Laform, Sister Shahina, Siddiqui, you're more than welcome to join in. Go to the website, menti.com. Like the instructions are there. I myself will be going. So as you do that, I'm loading up my own screen. So I'm going to stop sharing here, first of all. And I'm going to load it up on my browser. Okay, so everybody please go to menti.com. And once you are there, if you can please, whoops. Sorry, you might have to enter that code again, my mistake. So I'm entering my own code, 93059382. You're going to see a first question here. The #1 seminar. Okay, sorry, 1 second. That's the wrong one. I just loaded up. Okay. So if you, I guess, my mistake, everybody, please go back to menti.com and you are going to be entering so we've got the cities of Mississauga, Brampton, Toronto, Scarborough, essentially. And then get myself loaded in here. It looks like I'm the one who's falling behind. 179, go. The next question is, how did you hear about tonight's event? Was it through Facebook, a specific kind of Facebook group, whether it was Muslim Neighbor Nexus or another? Was it through a friend? I'm getting answers from here that it was an email from MNN, through the organizer, through WhatsApp, if it was through Twitter. Okay, thanks for entering that in. Okay, so the next question is going to be, I know how residential schools affected Indigenous communities for the long term. So we've got some who know very well, who know slightly. You can also be among the I do not know at all. Don't worry, this is anonymous, so I won't know who it is. So we're getting a lot of I know slightly, which is terrific because this is what this presentation is also about. And it's very important that we know. Great. Okay, a few more seconds to that before we go on to the next question. I understand how Islamophobia is linked to racism towards the Indigenous peoples in Canada. So do you see the link very clearly? Do you only see a slight connection? Or do you not see at all how Islamophobia is possibly even remotely related to the Indigenous peoples in Canada as to how they receive the racism? Okay, just getting the answers in. And I believe this is the final question coming up. I know how I can help to empower the Indigenous communities. Do you feel you know very well how to help to empower them? Do you have a slight idea? Do you have no idea? So I'm very impressed. There's actually quite a few people here who know very well, and maybe I can hear back from you what you are doing. There's a slight idea that's increasing more and more. Okay, great. All right, so thanks for going through that. That's actually going to be very important because that's essentially what our goal is from the seminar. I'm just trying to get out of this screen here. May, trying to navigate. Submit. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm back. So we're going to move on to our speakers. And the very first speaker that we have is Chief Stacy Laforme. Chief Stacy Laforme himself is the chief of the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nation. And he has been elected into office for quite some time, but he was active in the community for as early as 1999. And he is taking care of a traditional territory that is 3.9 million acres big in Southern Ontario. He has also been the chair of the Pan Am Games Secretariat, and he has also been part of the Ryerson School of Management Dean's Council. He is a notable storyteller and has published his own poems in Tallgrass, Poems of Reconciliation. I myself actually have read his poem when I visited him in Hagersville at the reserve just about 2 weeks ago, and he has his own work engraved in a Veterans Memorial Garden at the powwow grounds at the reserve, and you should check it out. It's very beautiful. It's very beautiful based on the Indigenous veterans who have served in the early wars of the 1800s and 1900s. So this is Chief Stacy Laforme presenting on managing the past and helping the Indigenous youth. Chief Stacy Laforme.
Ani, Gima R. Stacy Laforme, Mississaugas of the Credit. I use the term Gima because it's more fitting for my language. It roughly translates. You could use it as a substitution for chief if you want to. I also use chief, but out of respect to you, and only until you know that Gima or Ogama is the proper term. And when that happens, I'll stop using the term chief altogether. So I wanted to start off by reading a poem, and I should tell you off the bat that I use poetry sometimes instead of speaking the facts, because I have found that when I stand up and talk for a few minutes and I recite facts and numbers, people remember, but then a week later they forget. But I found if you use the arts, you can make a connection that is stronger and can last a lifetime. And so I use poetry as my form of art. Others may use music, dancing, drumming, whatever it may be, but poetry is what I use. So I'd like to read something called 215 Reconciliation. I sit here crying. I don't know why. I didn't know the children. I didn't know the parents, but I knew their spirit. I knew their love. I know their loss. I know their potential. And I am overwhelmed by the pain and the hurt, the pain of the families and friends, the pain of an entire people, unable to protect them, to help them, to comfort them, to love them. I did not know them, but the pain is so real, so personal. I feel it in my core, my heart, my spirit. I sit here crying, and I am not ashamed. I will cry for them and the many others like them. I will cry for you. I will cry for me. I'll cry for what could have been. Then I will calm myself, smudge myself, offer prayers, and know they are no longer in pain. No longer do they hurt. They are at peace. In time, I will tell their story. I will educate society so their memory is not lost. And when I am asked, what does reconciliation mean to me? I will say, I want their lives back. I want them to live, to soar. I want to hear their laughter, see their smiles. Give me that, and I'll grant you reconciliation. Now, I'm going to come back to that poem a little later on, because normally I would do an introduction, which I will do now. Ani, Lizu, Nagani, Nishtabekanini, Staslaform, Disnakas, Credit Dunzaba, Mainga Dodum, Mississauga, Nishnabe Dowell. So I just told you where I'm from, what my Anishinaabe name is, Nagani and Nishnabekanini, which roughly translates to leads, people, man. My clan, which is wolf on my mother's side and turtle on my father's side. And then where I'm from, the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe. I didn't understand before when I was doing this, because I would always end by saying Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, and I would always end strongly on Anishinaabe. And somebody once asked me, why do you always emphasize the end of that word Anishinaabe? Because the word is Anishinaabe. I didn't really know at the time that I was doing it. And so I thought about it and I answered. I said, sometimes we think we're alone and we think we can't speak because we're alone. And I said, I want people to know that I'm not just talking about myself or the community I'm from or the nation I belong to. I'm talking about the Anishinaabe, who are a people under their own in this country. And so one of the things that made me realize this was, it's difficult to be that lone voice that cries out in the dark and the quiet. But if you realize you're not alone, it becomes a lot easier. And so that's one of the reasons I do it. And what showed me how it works is I did a land acknowledgement for one of the rails stations in Toronto, and they played it a couple of years ago for a week during the month of Indigenous, whatever they call it these days. Anyway, awareness. And they played the land acknowledgement from the Anishinaabe, myself, the one I did. And I asked the person who, one of their managers, how it went, and they said, it went really well. People appreciated it, understood it more. He goes, we had an Anishinaabe worker, and his comment was, that's the first time in my life that I've ever heard my people's name at a higher level. And that is at once a moment of happiness and a moment of extreme sadness when you think about that, because everybody deserves and needs to see themselves in the world that surrounds them. And so, that's why when I talk about things, I try not to just focus on the aspect of me, my community, or even my nation, because sometimes it's about all of us. And so I'm very aware that, there's a lot of trauma in our lives, and we face a lot of racism and a lot of discrimination. But we are so much aware that we are not the only ones. And we will always stand with our brothers and sisters in this world who deal with the same sort of thing. We have more children in CAS systems than any other demographic. That's the Children's Aid Societies. We represent maybe 4% of the population, and yet we have so many in the prison systems. It's far, I think it's somewhere around a quarter of the prisoners would be Indigenous. I could look that up, or you can look it up, but the numbers are high. You know, you're 10 times as more likely to be shot if you're an Indigenous person in this country and killed by a police officer. You're 4 times, or I've heard different stories, between 4 to 7 times more likely to commit suicide if you're an Indigenous person in this country. So we face so many issues around systemic racism in this country, because there's our systems that were built a long time ago and founded a long time ago, built on the principles of a totally different people, built on the principles of a mostly Caucasian, white, older male society was where it started. So that's the type of system that we live in today, because nobody ever goes back to the beginning to try and fix the systems. You know, if you ever see people do strategic planning or planning, they'll go from where they are today or the last fiscal year, and they'll plan forward. Well, the systems that are created, that are embedded in our society, are so prejudicial that you cannot go forward from where you are today and expect them to get better, because you're only building on sand. You have to consider the fact that you now have a country that is made up of so many different races, that the systems that are in place are impacting all of those people, and we need to look at how we do things. So I just wanted to mention that before I get caught up in going on to my next part of my speech. The next part is I just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement. Not that you didn't do a great one, you did a fantastic job, but this is going to lead into something I want to say later. So here's my land acknowledgement. We give thanks to the Creator. We offer our respect and love to our Mother, the Earth. We acknowledge the world around us and understand our place within it. We acknowledge the many nations that walk this land in the past and the many who walk it today. We acknowledge and offer our respect to the Michisagi, the Mississaugas, of the Anishinaabe, who are the caretakers of this land and territory. So that's my land acknowledgement. And actually, I'll talk a little bit about that later too, if I don't forget, which I probably will. So I wanted to also offer you a prayer that I wrote a few years ago, and I use it now in a lot of my meetings. I have another one that I've written, but I want to use this one. But we give thanks to the Creator for allowing this gathering. We ask that He guide us and forgive us when we falter and disappoint. For though we aspire to greatness, we are, after all, only human. Grant us a clear mind, a pure heart, and courage. A clear mind to make intelligent, well thought out decisions. A pure heart to make decisions that are without personal bias or desire. And the courage to use both, a clear mind and a pure heart in our lives. Let us set aside small differences. Let us concentrate on real issues. Let us not be bogged down in rhetoric. Let us live each day with a feeling of accomplishment and pride. Most importantly, let us remember we are not adversaries, nor are we enemies. We share a similar past, a kindred spirit, and a common heritage. We must always remember the real reason we gather, to do the right thing for our people, our children, our future. Miigwech. And everybody knows Miigwech means thank you. Okay, so now I have on a ribbon shirt, which, as you can see, is decorated and has, it's called a ribbon shirt, so it has ribbons on it. Normally, the ribbon shirts I wear are, maybe I can just give you a quick one. Normally, the ribbon shirts I wear really reflect Mother Nature and the world around us. And, you know, I have all different types of them. Some are very, very bright and colorful, and some are more dark and stoic, but I have a number of them, and I wear them all the time. I mean, as much as I can. I mean, I have about 10 of them. But I was in a store one day, and I had I will say it, especially bright and almost silk ribbon shirt on that day. And I was in the store buying something, and a man came up behind me. He goes, "That's a nice shirt." I said, "Thank you." And then he said, "It takes a special kind of man to wear a shirt like that." So I chuckled, and I said, "Thanks." And it got me thinking, when I was young, I would have been too afraid to dress like this, too afraid of what I thought others would think or say. But the truth is, we should never have to adapt to fit into society. The world around us should adapt to embrace our uniqueness. I think that is a very strong message to our children and our youth that they need to understand, is that they can be the individuals they are. They can wear, things that honor them. And we should accept that and not be criticizing and not be condescending. I don't know what the gentleman's meant by his words, but I thought it was very amusing. And actually, not long after that, I got to do an opening for a whole bunch of youth, and I think it was the North American Indigenous Games. And I remember that story, and so I wanted to make sure I told them. So I told them all that story only because this gentleman had put it in my mind maybe a month before the event. So the timing of it was perfect, and I appreciate that. And I always tell people, you've always got to be aware of where these moments of understanding will come from. They could come from, it can come from animosity, they can come from conflict, they can come from friends, they can come from family, but just be open and accepting of them. And because it was just good timing, and of course, the youth in attendance really appreciated the sentiment and the ideology of the statement. So that was very good. And I tell people I wear those ribbon shirts, not only to pay homage to my history and who we are, but also to show our connection to our mother, the earth. There are usually flowers on it. I tell people to wear something that reminds them of earth, so they can teach others and their children and other people about their understanding of it and our connection to her. So yeah, this shirt though is different. As you can see, this shirt was given to me by a lady, Miss Smoke, who's a Curve Lake member, I believe, and a Mississauga member. And she made it to deal with the discovery, the uncovering, whatever you want to call it, of the children on the grounds of the residential schools. You see, a while back, orange was adopted by an Indigenous lady who started the trend of having orange as a symbol for residential schools. And so when this occurred, the orange was obviously a color to be used, and it's been used on flags. And there's a statement to every child matters on it. And it's really a beautiful shirt, and I thank her for that. Sandra Moore was her name. And so she made the shirt for that, and I appreciate that. And I wear it these days whenever I get the chance to do so. So now I'm gonna go back to the poem I opened up with, Reconciliation. So the poem was written the evening or the next day, I can't remember, after I start hearing about the 215 children that were found on the BC site. Just so you know now, I think it's over 5,100 children that have been discovered on different sites. And we anticipate it growing considerably more before, the numbers are finalized. And quite frankly, I don't know that we'll ever find every child, nor will we find out what else could have happened to them. So we will do what we can, and we'll keep searching. But the pain is very real, as you can tell from not only Indigenous people but other people. You know, when I wrote this poem, I wrote it when I was, you know, angry, hurt. I was hopeful. I was thinking about love. And when I was reading it, I was just thinking, there's a story for 25 minutes in this poem, you know, because it talks about I don't have to know you to love you, which I think is a fundamental principle of life and something that we can all relate to. I mean, you talk about the pain and hurt, not just of Indigenous people, but people around the country who felt that pain and who shared that pain. And the concept, I don't have to know you to love you, is just a connection point. In truth, we feel this way because we actually all do know each other at some level, and there is a connectivity that exists. But for the way society embraces these things, the concept of I don't have to know you to love you, in my mind, is very strong. And then we talked about you know, smudging, prayers, gathering the children. That's about, you know, the next thing about healing, but it's also about our ways of doing things and recognizing that these children are no longer lost and they're no longer just bones in the earth. They are, you know, gone onto the spirit world, and the pain is our pain. You know, it's not theirs. And there's more in here that I could talk about, and I might still, but at the end, you see, I talk about reconciliation. And why I did that was because those are the buzzwords. Those are the words that right now that are popular with Canada and politicians in regards to making things better with the Indigenous world. And people talk about it, and I've been to events where we've had great conversations and there's been many ideas generated, and I've been happy I've been there. And I'll even say, you know, there are no small steps when it comes to this. But I don't think that people really understood the depth and the breadth of the issues we are talking about until they actually had proof that there were these children's remains in unmarked, well, just left in the ground where nobody knew. And so they didn't know the depth and the breadth of the idea and the concept of reconciliation. I mean, I think now people understand that. I think before we've just been sort of scratching at the surface, trying to get comfortable with the idea. You know, even though we've been teaching about residential schools and missing and murdered women and things of that nature, this was actually a wake-up call. This was actually a in-your-face moment for Canadian society, and that tug at the heartstrings. Because another thing the poem does is actually tries to relate it to your children. You know, it doesn't just talk about Indigenous children, it talks about your children. And I fundamentally believe that these are the children of this land, the children of this country, and that they're all our responsibility. And that's why when people come to me and they talk about how can we come and join you in this process, how can we show our grief and respect, and I say, you don't have to do it with us. You don't even have to do it in our way. As a matter of fact, it probably means more if you do it in your own way. If it has meaning to you. I mean, I don't think that we should ever forget this moment, but I think you should remember it and grieve for it in your own way. And we can all do that at the same time. And that way we make sure that we don't forget, because, you know, I've said this before, but there are moments in the lives of a country that determines how it goes forward. And I believe this is such a moment. We are in such a time right now that we have to decide how we're going to go forward into the future. You know, my people have a belief called the 8 fires, prophecies, if you will, where they believe that, you know, and they believe that the 7 fires have already been lit, and history has recorded those things that tied them together. I can't tell you because I'm not an expert on all those. But I know the eighth fire is sort of a determination of how we're going to go into the future. It talks about the people will choose to embrace the responsibilities to each other and the land, and they'll go into a world that is peaceful and calm and a thing of beauty, or they will choose to go down another path where things are not that way, where things are challenging and tough and difficult and very challenging. And so that's another path. And I believe that the things that are happening in our world are telling us that, you know, we are at a time when we have to make decisions because, you know, if you look around at the many issues that we face in this country, this world, we don't have so many moments left that we can ignore any. And I think this is something we should remember. So yeah, that's sort of it. There's more that I could talk about it, but I won't. And obviously, you know, I mentioned the crying part because growing up in my culture, I mean, we didn't cry, you know. I mean, we did, but never where anybody could see it. So that's obviously part of it too, is that understanding. And I made a statement to a politician the other day. And it's not all flushed out in my head, so I probably shouldn't mention it to you, but I'm gonna. So I told him, just from my perspective, but I think it's broader. I told him, I'm angry. I said, I'm not in your face, jump up and down, yelling angry. I'm deep in my bones angry. I'm angry so far down that I have to remind myself that I'm not angry at you. I'm not angry at the person who cut me off in line. I'm not angry at the grocery clerk who, you know, doesn't seem to know what I need to get done. I know that I'm not angry at everybody. I'm angry because there are generational issues and things in our past that we've lived through and are still living through, and we've never come to terms with. And they exist in a lot of Indigenous people and a lot of other parts of society. And, you know, that's why we're in the world where, if you will look at, you know, I've never been a proponent of taking statues down or changing names. I believe we should tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you're going to have a statue up, it should say everything about this character. But that was my belief. But since this has happened, I recognize that for some people, this is needed. You know, this is almost part of their journey, is to actually do this and pull them down. So I'm fine with it. If that's what it takes for some people to, I shouldn't say some people, if that's what it takes to move forward on this journey, then that's what it takes. But I do tell institutions, don't think you're off the hook because your statue's down. Don't think because you changed your name, you're off the hook. This means you have to work twice as hard to make sure the true story is still held and still upheld. And so you don't get to say that we took it down and changed our name, it's over. No, you got to work twice as hard to make sure the real story is not lost to history. Because we are very, overall, people in this country in the world, out of sight, out of mind. So we have to understand that now we have to work a lot harder in some instances, or we have to find another way. And that's why when I got a call to go to Caledon today, I wish I could have went, but I never. And they wanted to know, they were going to have a pop-up market and do, you know, gather funds. All the money was going to one of the residential school funds. And they also want to know what we can do to help commemorate. And I go, that's all great. And if you want, I'll even help you connect to who you want to. We can present it, or I can present it for you. Whatever you want is fine. But have you given any thought to how you're going to make sure in your community that this moment isn't forgotten? And you don't have to put up a statue, because I don't believe we really have very many statues in my culture. We might have one or two that we in the modern times, or more modern times. But
Chief Stacy LaForme,
yes,
I was wondering if we can actually hear more about this, how the communities can help to empower your community in the question and answer session, because this is something we do really need to discuss.
So are you telling me to move on?
Trying to be politically correct here, but obviously it's not working.
That's fine.
Given your take on politicians.
Just let me wrap it up. Then that
Yes,
part,
please. Thank you, Chief LaForme.
by saying, I told them, work with your community, work with your mayor, figure out what you need to do to heal and to come and to remember and to partner. So that's all I'll say about that now. Since we're chatting back and forth, how long do I have left?
We were left 5 minutes ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. It's just that you're saying very important things, right? So we need to hear this. And to be honest, the poem that you said is very moving. I highly recommend everyone who's listening to this right now, when this is done on YouTube, look up Chief Stacey LaForme, quote unquote, 215 Reconciliation. It's a collaboration with the Canadian musical band Bare Naked Ladies, and it's very moving with the acoustic guitar. And last point before I introduce to you the next speaker is that the Muslim community cannot compare in any way the intergenerational trauma that Indigenous communities have been facing. But I will say this, Chief Stacey, from an insider I know of from the CAS, from the Children's Aid Society, that the numbers of children who are actually being taken into custody in the Muslim community is increasing. It's increasing because I can't speak for all Muslims, but I can definitely say as someone from the Pakistani culture, we're not supposed to be disclosing our feelings and trauma you face, you keep it in. And it's coming down on the children in this part of the world, unfortunately. So this is something we do need to address as a community within our own, but we can relate to yours, that this is over 7.5 generations. Okay, so Miigwech, Chief Stacey, for saying what you did. Thank you, May. So I am now going to be introducing to you our second speaker, Sister Shahina Siddiqui. She is from Winnipeg, and she has been living here since 1976. She has, in 1999, helped to establish the Islamic Social Services of Canada, for which she is currently the volunteer executive director. She is a strong proponent of social justices, of female leadership, having worked with Indigenous women, whom she herself considers to be her sisters and daughters. She has also helped with the reconciliation process in Winnipeg. She has received the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal, the Canadian Red Cross Humanitarian of the Year, as well as holds an honorary doctorate of laws from University of Manitoba. And frankly, I think all that's left on her list is getting the Nobel Peace Prize, inshallah. So I present to you now Sister Shahina Siddiqui on the case studies of spiritual oppression. Sister Shahina Siddiqui.
Thank you, and assalamu alaikum, peace be with all of you. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Creator, most compassionate, most merciful. First, I want to offer my brother LaForme tobacco virtually to honor you and your words that have touched my heart today and all of us. I humbly acknowledge Treaty 1 territory and the land on which I have the privilege to live, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I also acknowledge Treaty 3, traditional territory of Shoal Lake First Nations number 40, which is the primary water source for Winnipeg, and who themselves continue to have a boiled water advisory. I was not planning to do this, but after I heard my brother, I was compelled to share with him a poem that came to me right after the news of finding the graves of our children. And I read this to acknowledge our pain together. So please give me a couple of minutes to go through this. With the beat of the drums and call to prayer, Indigenous and Muslim call, Creator, justice now. In the still of the night, children are buried, no ceremony, no prayers, no grandmother's song. Without father's arms and mother's embraced, placed in the cold ground, no marker, no record, hidden away, so they thought. Knowing not on Creator's command, angels carry the tiny souls, safe in wings, soft and warm. Under the shade of the Almighty, the Great Spirit, they laugh and play in peace, watching over their loved ones. With the beat of the drums and the call to prayer, Indigenous and Muslims call, Creator, justice now. Mother Earth shaking with grief, tears of generations breaking it free. Truth revealed, horrors lay bare. There is no looking away, no cover up. No ablution can cleanse away the colonial soul. With the beat of the drums and the call to prayer, Indigenous and Muslims call, Creator, justice now. Children abused, starved, beaten, pulled away from mother's arms, over grandparents' pleas and fathers' protests, snatched, imprisoned, dignity trampled. With the beat of the drums and the call to prayer, Indigenous and Muslim call, Creator, justice now. Canada's leaders respond, no remorse, no action, just empty words. History hidden, culture erased, dignity stolen, deafening silence, willfully blind. Cloaked in arrogance, dismissive, discriminating, demonizing. With the beat of the drums and the call to prayer, Indigenous and Muslim call, Creator, justice now. The Creator responds, despair not, I listen. Children's screams, mothers lament, fathers helpless sigh, grandmothers cries. No justice comes near each day, exposing lies, you telling truth with courage. Humbly walking the land, seeking ancestors' prayers, treading the path of reconciliation, humility your armor, I your protector, offering healing to humanity, resisting pollution in water and earth, caring for animals, your noble mission, your magnanimity, your hospitality, has taught generations how to stand undefeated. Remember, I am your friend, sufficient as helper, just the compassionate, chosen this time for renewal. Be ready, stay alert, hold hands, be united in prayer. With beat of the drums and call to prayer, Indigenous and Muslims call, Creator, hear our prayers. When I came to Canada, all that I knew about the Indigenous, the First Nations, the Inuit, the Métis people of this land, what I saw in Westerns, and most immigrants did, and most refugees, because that's what they show in the refugee camps, are the Westerns, which, of course, they're representations of Indigenous. When I came here and took my citizenship, that in those days it was 3 years, we were asked questions, but never about the First Nations of this land, the Indigenous peoples. We were asked about the Queen and whatnot, so we read up on that. But the day I realized the citizenship of this country, I inherited the burden of the dark history of colonialism, of the colonization of the peoples of this land, which was not discovered. It was already there. People were living. And so I thought, what do I do? What is my responsibility now? How can I move forward? Knowing what I know now. In the 1970s, when I came, I think last of the residential schools were closed. It's as recent as that. It's not ancient history. And so I started to learn, to make friends, to get out of my comfort zone and reach out. And I've been very, very fortunate, I should say, that my handout was also met with the same warmth. And I can say that now I call them my Indigenous family, my sisters and my daughters and my brothers. I think this is the kind of approach that Muslims need to have. We do not need to empower the Indigenous community. They're already empowered. We don't need to speak for them because they are absolutely capable, much more than us, to speak for themselves. What we need to do is stand with them, not speak for them. We need to be there as their family, as their relatives. We need to be there when they call upon us to come and stand with them. We need to learn about the spirituality. We need to learn how much we have in common. This is something that, unfortunately, Muslim community has not taken the effort to learn. I remember being at a conference where one of the Indigenous authors, I only remember his last name, maybe my brother can remind me, Solomon, and he had written a book and he was talking about it. And I was listening, and I was listening to the similitude and the examples that he was giving. And I was much younger then, and I walked over to him after the conference and I said, "Have you read the Quran?" And he looked at me, he said, "Quran?" I said, "Yeah, our holy book." And he said, "No." And I said, "But all the similitudes you mentioned, the signs of the Creator, whether it was in the trees or the animal world or in the universe, are there in the Quran." And he said, "You know what? Now I have to read it." And that's the journey that started. And I remember after 9/11, one of the first communities that reached out to us was the Indigenous. My friend, Reverend Stan McKay, called me and he said, "Shahina, we have a conference here where Indigenous elders and leaders have come from all over the country. And we are hearing what the Muslim community is going through, and I would like them, they want to come and visit you, a group of us." And I said, "Please, welcome." And my home, at that time, my office was in my home. And when they came, they were young and they were old. And there was a woman who was 90 years plus from the north, almost bending over, and they all came. We had tea. And one of the young persons, one of the youngest, looked at me and he says, "You know, we keep hearing in this media about Allah. Who is this guy?" And Stan, I remember, looked at me with horror, said, "Oh my God." And I said, "That's the name for the Creator." And he said, "Oh, okay." See how when you reach out, when you connect, how you learn from each other. And when we talked, and also Muslims don't acknowledge that almost every Muslim country was colonized. My grandparents and parents came from colonized experience. Those colonial injustices that try to destroy our cultures are instilled in us, that inferiority complex, that somehow we are not good enough. Our culture is not good enough. The color of our skin is not good enough. And we carry that complex with us. And as I was talking about my experience when my mother put me in a Roman and Catholic convent school, where 99% of my teachers were either Catholics or Christians, and Mother Superior and other nuns, where we could not speak our language. And I remember one day after Eid, which is a big celebration, I had gone to school and I was so excited and I was wearing bangles from Eid. And our teacher saw that and she said, "You know, you're not allowed." And she gave me a cane and said, "Take them off." And I took those bangles off. I was so young, grade 3. They broke and they cut my skin. I still have the scar today. And then she got a bit, oh gosh, what happened? She sent me myself alone to get it looked at the nursery. And on the way, our nun, who was the principal, saw me and took me. I came home with a big bandage, still soaking with blood. And my mother said, what happened? And I told her, I was wearing the bangles from Eid, and the teacher got so upset. And she said, well, you should have followed the rules. And today I think about it and I say, wow, the impact of colonization, even though I could not at that time identify it till I came to Canada and truly started to study how our community operates, how our community relates to each other, the divisions that we have within us. And I started studying and found out the impact colonization had, and especially on our women. How colonizers would, in various parts of the world, would make the women, Muslim women, feel that they were oppressed and suppressed because of this piece of cloth on my head, or the social norms that we had in interactions, or the leadership positions that we had in our community. And they went after the women to convince them that we were somehow victims. And they would take them, and women were burning in Algeria, I have photos of women who were burning their hijabs to appease the superior culture, the colonizers, they're the Europeans. And I think the same mentality of colonization, the same stratagems were applied here, were applied in Australia, and wherever the Indigenous people were. So at some level, at a very deep level, we connect. And I remember that older lady who walked towards me, embraced me, and she was crying. And when she heard our stories, she said, you and I the same. So why is it that we have not reached out? Why is it that we cannot take advantage of healing together? Take advantage of raising our voices together? I can tell you that what I have received from my Indigenous relatives, almost all of them, no matter what they are, whether they are politicians or what in Manitoba, they call me auntie. And to me, that's the biggest honor, because in my culture, when you want to honor someone, you call them auntie or uncle. And that is who I am in Winnipeg. I am Auntie Shahina. And that touches my heart. And whenever, and after what happened in London, Ontario, what happened in Quebec, what happened, the Indigenous community was one of the first to reach out to us. They were there to do the smudge ceremony. They were there to do the honor drums. They were there to sit with us and stand with us. But it takes time and effort. It takes for us to not be afraid to share. Allah says in the Quran that we created you into nations and tribes so that you may know each other, not to hate each other. If the divine design, if the Creator's plan is to create us in different colors, in different nations, with different languages, then who are we to fight that? Who are we to say one is better than the other? And that is at the core of racism. So when you say how from anti-Indigenous hate to Islamophobia, it is the seed of hate that was sown for the other, right? And those seeds are the seeds of hate. So what we are facing is just a new phase of that old hate. So how do we respond? By hate? Of course, that's not going to work. That's not going to help. What we need to respond is with knowledge, with compassion, with understanding. I want to give more time to questions, so I will end with one story for you. After 9/11, I was burdened with doing presentations with media. Hundreds and thousands of presentations in media I have done over the years. But that particular time, about a year after 9/11. Every time I went to speak somewhere where it was open to public, I would see my friend, Gladys Cook. May she rest in peace. And she would always be giving me the thumbs up when I was speaking, or come after if she saw that I got emotional with the hate rhetoric and the hate incidences that were happening across Canada targeting Muslims. And she would give me a hug and she would say, be strong, I'm with you, be strong. And one day, and then I lost track of her. We kind of drifted. And then one day I was speaking at a palliative care conference. And as I stood on the stage, I saw Gladys sitting there in a wheelchair. And I couldn't wait for my session to be over so I could go. And I went over, I said, Gladys, where have you been? I gave her a hug. And how are you? You're not, and we talked about each other's lives. And then she said, Shahina, remember, you may not see me. And we haven't drifted, but I always say a prayer for you every day. Do you want to know what that prayer is? And I said, please. And she said, I pray that whoever wishes you harm, may they never succeed. And I think about those powerful words. And when I face Islamophobia or hate crime or hate speech, or being told to go back where I came from, I remember that prayer and it gives me strength. And that is the day I realized I was home. The Turtle Island was my home. I didn't come here out of choice. The Creator chose this place for me, this land for me. And I was welcomed by the Indigenous peoples of this land. So I can see the yellow light. So I will end here. And I hope and I pray that as our two peoples heal, that we become an example to the rest of humanity. What is expected of us from our own traditions, and to walk the path with pride, but with humility. Thank you.
Jazakallah, Sister Shahina, for your talk. The bracelet story I can highly resonate with. I went to a school in Saudi Arabia, which was based on a British curriculum. And some of my girlfriends who are probably watching this right now, we can attest to how serious it was to be wearing those bracelets, even to have mehendi or henna on our skin. So your poem is very moving. We actually even got a comment from a 9th grader. He's actually a gentleman. His name is Musa Faridi. He said, so profound and heartwarming poetry. Can we please get the written pieces? And so, Sister Shahina, I will reach out to you to have access to that poem, please. It's beautiful, and I'll share it with Musa. Musa, I'll present my email address at the end, and we can connect that way. So again, thank you, Sister Shahina. I am very humbled. I definitely need to change my wording for empowerment. We are the ones who need to learn from them, from the Indigenous brothers and sisters, and I have much to do. And I feel in questions and answers, you and Chief Stacey LaForme are going to educate us. I was actually going to move on to say that how can you empower someone or a cause, and that's with time and money. So giving them your time, backing them up with finances, and educating ourselves or educating others. But I find what we lack in the Muslim community is to give that time. Cash is, alhamdulillah, easy in our community, but we're not willing to give it to the cause. We can be present at more protests. We can be present at events. So just before we move into the question and answer segment, I do need to share with you one resource. I did get a comment, what educational resources can we have for learning more about the Indigenous communities? So just bear with me as I pull out that slide. It's going to be pretty busy for one of them, so you may want to be screenshotting. Let me just take it out here on my smartphone because my laptop isn't cooperating with me of all days. Okay. Okay. If you are only able to help in terms of finances, this is a set of organizations, both for-profit and non-for-profit, which you can back up. I do need to point out, for example, for-profit, the Indigenous design that you're seeing in the top right corner of the turtles, that's actually done by an artist by the name of Karen Bizu. And she actually runs her own retail online place supporting other Indigenous products, Indigenous owned business products. And so when you purchase from her store, her online store, which has such an amazing collection, you are actually supporting a whole community. And another way you can also work with to support them is with the Save the Evidence campaign and the Orange Shirt Society. And Orange, as you know, Chief Stacey Laforme, it's very important. Before questions and answers, for the folks who might be interested to screenshot this, because these are different resources I have personally gathered in my time, my years of trying to understand the Indigenous culture and the people I need to learn from. We all learn in different ways, whether it's through movies, visually, auditorially, and sometimes we need to be present at an actual place. So please screenshot this, come back to this later from the seminar. But if there's two items I can highlight for you to definitely give time to is the 94 calls to action document. I believe Chief Stacey Laforme also touched on this. These are action plans. Right now it's all theory, and it's very sad at a national level but what I'm aware from last time I heard for this year, from the 94 calls to action, maybe only about 4 to 6 have actually been implemented by the federal government. And, you know, the federal government, I'm not going to say a whole lot on them right now, but it's sad. It is very sad. And that's where we need to take charge on our own, whether we own our own business, what we can do about hiring those who are part of the Indigenous community, or if we're in education, teaching others like I'm trying right now, or even being present at protests and writing to your MP. It is so, so important. And then if you really want to internalize how it's been, you can start at the Mohawk Indian Residential School, just 1 hour away from us in Brantford. It is very moving. And to visit the Woodland Cultural Center from there. So I'm going to now open up the floor to questions and answers. And you can go ahead and bring in any comments that you are interested to share with us as the viewers. So I actually have gotten a question for you, Chief Stacey. The Muslim community would like to know how we can specifically stand up with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. I have heard personally, Chief Stacey, from you that there are problems going on right now with the Northern Ontario communities having to be resettled, evacuated from the wild forests and resettled into Hagersville, where the reserve is, and the youth is getting a culture shock that a lot of them are going into addiction. So can you please give us some very concrete steps what we can do to alleviate these issues, specifically with the youth, or anything you can address on a specific level, how we can stand with you. You can take over.
Oh, you sure you want me to take over? Remember what happened last time? We were late by 5 minutes. Anyway, the example you've given of the fires that have brought Indigenous people from the north into Toronto and Milton, or different areas in the Toronto hub, in the greater Toronto area, has been interesting. So one of the problems, and I talked to some of my friends about this, is, there's cultural shock, obviously. There has existing conditions within, health and social conditions that come with any people that come someplace else. And there's no real strategy around how it happens or how it works. At the last minute, some of the cities and agencies will reach out to, if they're lucky, they may have friendship centers or different centers that are in their communities that can help them and give them advice. Sometimes they'll still need other resources though. And sometimes they'll reach out to the First Nations and say, this is going on, we need your help. But it's always sort of last minute. So there's a need to sit down and plan strategies about, okay, we know this isn't going to be the last time something like this happens. What do we need to put in place? And this requires people to come together and actually do some planning and some work, and on the other side of things, I think the Indigenous people themselves need to come together and figure out a planning and strategy around our own people as well. And maybe that's a way you can support as well. So first off, coming together, planning for the next crisis that's going to happen. And of course, there will be crises. And what's the strategy? What's the steps? How do we go forward? That can be looked at. In First Nations world, I've often found that I have a good vision, or others have a good vision and a plan, and we want to go forward, but we lack the resources. And I don't say we lack the resources in the concept of the finances. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But in the concept of the bodies on the ground, the peoples, the skill sets that are needed to enact the vision and the planning. So if there's a way to build a relations that allows us to work back and forth and provide some type of beneficial relationship. Part of my first role as the chief of the Mississaugas as a credit was going out through our territory, making friends and allies with basically anybody who wanted to be a friend and an ally. Some of those took the forms of MOUs and relationship accords, agreements, and different things of that nature. But there is a lack of tools on First Nations, in the First Nation reserves and communities, where we could use the resources of others. In the past, I've sometimes reached out to universities to do that. If I need something, I'll sometimes work with them and make a plan. So maybe that's another area that we could work together. But the other area is that the Indigenous people need our own response to crisis. We need a plan and a strategy, and we need to get it funded. So I'll give you an example. 20 years ago, when I was a relatively young man, there was a crisis in the north, a suicide crisis, and the army went and picked up the kids and took them to an old army base and kept them there while they treated them and did something. And being a young man, maybe it was many years longer than that, I said, where are my people? Where are we? And not reflecting on the fact that maybe we don't have the resources. But anyway, so come to last year or the year before, when they thought people were going to be evacuated from the north and brought down to the communities, I again said, where are my people? We need to play a stronger and more strategic role in this. And that's, some areas I could use help, on concrete help, figuring that out, not only the methodology, but the strategy and the planning. So those types of things are very much needed. And that's in relation to one thing. You know, there's much more we can talk about if we're going to talk about what areas you want to be an ally in, or just generally, or how do we go forward. You know, it's a difficult thing to pinpoint without pointing to a target, right? If we're talking about kids in care, well, we're charged with the same fight, and we should be sitting down and talking about, well, how do we fix this? I was at a meeting with a former minister of Indigenous Affairs, and she said, Minister Philpott at the time was a minister, I believe, and we were talking with myself and other chiefs around children in care and CES systems, and she said, we're going to help you. This legislation is going to help you. And I said, we're going to get our kids out of care, yes, because we need to, and we're going to do that and take control of them. But what about the other children? What about the other marginalized parts of society who are being brought into this system? I'm not going to just ignore that. So we have to work on the whole system, not just as it pertains to the Indigenous. So I'll stop there, rattling there.
Thank you, Chief Stacey Laforme. As you were speaking, I am going to say not only to you, but also to the listeners who are viewing this, especially for those who are leaders in our community. So this is exactly why I wanted to do this seminar, to connect with those leaders. And I don't want this to be a runoff seminar and that's it, it's done. I want to continue to educate myself and educate other people who really need to learn this. So if you want to get involved, whoever's listening to this, and concretely take those steps that Chief Stacey Laforme highlighted, please connect with me. I am going to have my email address at the end. The conversation needs to get started, not only with the Indigenous brothers and sisters, but more so between us. And that's my prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He will make it happen for us to come together and take those steps. Thank you, Chief Stacey Laforme. That was perfect timing. We have a question also for Sister Shahina. A question we have received is, can you shed some light on the different cultures that have been discriminated in Canada? I believe you called it the othering factor in your articles. And how can we break this chain of being mentally colonized to not pass it down to our kids here?
That's a lifelong journey because of the trauma being intergenerational. For most of us in the Muslim countries, when we were colonized for the resources. We were colonized for control and power. And so the way they could do it was to enslave us mentally. And enslavement of the mind is the toughest to break out of. And I think it was long-term thinking, because when they did leave, the colonizers were driven out of Muslim countries, they still left their leaders behind. People that they had trained, people that they thought would continue to be their friends. And so it is a long journey, but I think first and foremost, as you were saying, Zainab, that we have to have an internal conversation. I do workshops at universities and others about the stratagems of colonization when it comes to Muslim countries and Muslim women and Muslim societies. And I think we need to do that for ourselves as well. I remember doing it for Muslim Students Association or somewhere. And so many young people came back to me and said, thank you. I now understand where my parents are coming from. I now understand the psychology of our community, why we behave sometimes in certain ways, because it has impacted our cognitive patterns. It has impacted our own view, because we have internalized the messages that we are not good enough. And I think this is where we need the help of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, mutually, to help each other. When I hear of the achievements, of the amazing stories from our Indigenous brothers and sisters of resilience, of not being broken with all that they have suffered, and I'm saying, that's the model that I need to bring to my community of resilience, right? Islamophobia cannot break you. It shouldn't be given the power to do that to you. And it should also not make you defensive, right? And it shouldn't be about me or nobody. It has to be about all of us. The history of Canada is full of racism. We haven't left anybody out of it. Starting with the Indigenous, which continues to this day. And I think I really would recommend for all of you to see The Seven Fires, the documentary movie, beautifully done. And you will see the similarities of the colonial experience that we've had. Then came, of course, the Chinese, head tax, building the railway. And we thought it was dead. Wow, COVID happens and suddenly it's alive again. And we see anti-Asian racism. Then came the Japanese. After Second World War, what did we do? We put them in internment camps. We took away their property. So we keep recycling colonial practices, policies, just give it a new name. That's it. And that is why the newcomers, who perhaps do not fit the definition of settlers, because we didn't know, we applied, we thought we're coming through the front door, but we did inherit this. Now we are suddenly waking up to the fact that, oh, residential schools, oh, Indigenous peoples, because now it's happening to us. That's the burden that we carry, that we did not try or reached out to get ourselves educated, and still there is resistance. Oh, we are different. No, we are not. We are all human beings. And what was done to all of us at different levels came from the same mindset of European imperialism, right? So if we want to change this country, if we want to make it better, as a grandmother, I'm always thinking, what am I leaving behind for my grandchildren? So do you know how we get involved as a family? My grandson, who is now 14, volunteers for Bear Clan. He goes once a week with his father to down the main street and other areas, giving water, cleaning the area. How many of our youths are volunteering with the Indigenous peoples? This is where you start, right? You ask, what help can we give? Don't have to be, just be on your feet helping out. How many of the mosques, for example, have hot kitchens once a week? Can't we take the food to whichever area that can we not invite them into our community? We are always inviting Indigenous peoples to our mosque, where we share a meal. We break fast together. In October, when they have commemorating the murdered and missing Indigenous women, we both communities fast together, right? We break fast together, remembering and praying together. And and we have recognized Senator Sinclair with our Ihsan Award, which is the highest quality of a Muslim, is to have Ihsan. We have done that to Bear Clan in Manitoba, recognize them with the Ihsan Award. This is how you build relationships, not by sitting in our silos. We have a funding from the Winnipeg Foundation to do reconciliation for 2 years program funded by them. We were the only non-Christian, one Christian church got it, religious organization that got this funding. And what are we doing with it? We are connecting with our Indigenous communities. We are doing youth programs together. Do you know that the youngest population in Canada are the Indigenous and the Muslim youth. Their median age for the Indigenous is 26 and for Muslims is 28. The fastest growing young population. And I keep telling Canadians when I'm speaking to them, who do you think will carry your pension plans? Are these young people? So the young have to, our Canadian Leadership Institute that we said, we have elders coming in. We take children to the Thunderbird House, to Aboriginal Center. I remember at one ceremony, one of the young person, when the elder was explaining the smudging, was very tight and kind of, oh, I can't do this. This is against our faith. And I said, why? And I said, what is he doing? So with the smoke of the grass burning, they do this, they do this, they do this, they do that. What does it remind us of? What do we do when we do wudu and are getting ready for prayer? We do it with water, right? Allah says in the Quran, I have sent prophets and messiahs to every people. And when you start delving into spirituality with Indigenous elders, you realize how much we have in common, what we share, right? We have David, who is Indigenous, working at a place. He's the coordinator for the program, reconciliation program. And he said, you know, Shahina, my boss said, I'm going to be working at ISA because of reconciliation. And I'm saying, who is this woman? Why does she want to do reconciliation? Her people didn't do anything to us. And I looked at David and I smiled. I said, yes, David, but when I took the citizenship, when I took residency on your land, I inherited that burden. We need to reconcile. The 64th point on the recommendations is for the churches to reach out, but churches doesn't mean churches. It also includes mosques. But sometimes our leadership, I'm sorry to say, think that their only job is to do missionary work. This is the last thing we need. One of the accompaniment of colonization was missionary work. Bible in one hand and bread in the other. Well, look what it did, right? It is not up to us to bring anyone. We have to meet people where they are, not start proselytizing and taking over and trying to establish, because that's again colonial thinking. Establish a superiority or we are better than, or I'm going to bring you to salvation. That's not the Islamic way. That's not the Indigenous way. We share. We don't convert. We don't impose, because that's not what the Creator is asking us.
Jazakallah, Sister Shahina, for that response. As you were speaking, and you were talking specifically about the Chinese tax, it's interesting you say that, because for the last several years that I've been doing my own studies of histories of Mississauga, the area that I live in, just so the locals know, is actually Churchill Meadows. And in the 1800s, there was racism going on towards the Irish Catholics. So we all know about the famine that they had, and they moved to Canada, specifically Mississauga. They were given a place called the Catholic Swamp, where basically that area wasn't the best place to be growing agriculture, and it was like basically a leftover land. And they faced a lot of outsideness. And then later on, it was the Italians. World War II happens. Some time back, Justin Trudeau gave an apology to the Italian community for confining the Italian Canadians because they weren't on side of the Allies. So there's always something going on. So we're going to be wrapping up our questions very soon. So if you want to get one more in, try to, because it's going to be Maghrib time soon. And there is still just a little bit more left. Chief Stacey Laforme, are you able to state about the Indian Act, how it is currently unfair? Maybe Oh, I know, like 2 minutes as if it's no justice. But I'll specify something that maybe some of our Muslim viewers do not know, that slowly the status Indian quota is actually shrinking. Can you elaborate on that as
Yeah,
intermarriage is going on? So please educate us on that.
So the getting rid of the as it was the Indian and the Indian has been a, a, a desire of the government since they first met us for many different reasons. They have obviously residential school was one way, you know, the many issues we face today are another way. But the greatest of all is the fact that the Indian Act and the government determine who is and is not a member of my nation. I should say it's changed a little now. We can make our own membership, but they will not recognize that they have any financial responsibility or any obligations under treaty if they're not the people who are determining who is and is not a status Indian. And if you notice their process, and it's very complicated to me as a chief. I know I have staff who can break it down into each little section. So if a Indigenous man marries a non-Indigenous woman, and you know, or if they adopt a woman who's not Indigenous, there are all these different ways that you lose your status. You know, you might go down one generation or two generations, so you lose your status. So it's a closed system, and any closed system over any given time is a dead system. Now, there have been amendments to the Indian Act over time that try to correct these discriminatory practices, but they're usually based on human rights challenges. And so they make an amendment that fixes a little tiny piece of it, but creates greater problems because they're not looking at the overall whole, and it still is a closed system. So First Nations have to take back their own membership, and the government has to be held accountable to the members that the nation themselves are saying are members. Otherwise, it's a closed system. Now, the act of colonialism, the idea of colonialism is still so rampant that we have actual Indigenous people who don't want to open the system because they're afraid they'll lose all they have. And so that colonialism exists internally because of the many years of forced. I try to get them to understand that a closed system is a dead system, and these systems need to be replaced. There's two fights. One, we have to ensure that we decide who our members are based on our own history, our own culture, our own practices. And if we've lost members out there, we need to welcome them home. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to hold the government accountable so that they still have responsibility and obligations under the Constitution, the treaties, and those types of things. So there's two fights going on at the same time. And the idea of colonialism and that kind of thinking is so ingrained into people that I find myself almost daily saying, stop thinking so colonial. That's all I'll do for now, is just end right there. But there's a lot to say on the subject.
I have to make that my mantra. Stop thinking so colonial.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say one final thing?
Sure.
The problem with us and each other is the fact that we allow this government to still look at us and dissect us into groups and segments, when in fact there has to be a broader concept of how it's looked at. So all the policies that impact us and systemically are racist against us, we need to stand together and look at these things together and say, these don't work for us. Let's sit down and let's fix these. Let's strategize on how we move from where we are today to a new world that works for all of us. Anyway.
Okay, thank you, Chief Stacey Laforme. So thank you to both of you, Miigwech, for sharing what you did. There's a lot of information here, and I'm going to be waiting for, inshallah, Muslim Neighbor Nexus to post this video on YouTube, on their YouTube channel, and on Facebook, because I myself have to re-listen to this to take those specific notes, because I'm a note taker, see what we can do about all the things that have been brought up in terms of action items. So right before we wrap up, there are two key things that I do need to highlight to you. As you can imagine, this is not a one-person show, a one-person program. I have had a team with me to help, and I just want to briefly thank them because I am very gracious that they did, that they were part of this. Okay, so I want to thank our team members, May Mustafa, Sonia Mohsen, Zunaira Ishaq, and Uruj Faisal. There's one more important thing here, so please just sit tight after this slide. Special mentors of mine to be launching this program and navigating through it from A to Z are Sister Rabia Khadr, Sister Mimona Hussein, and my friend Saima Hussein. To get involved with the community, you can't really do that until your own family helps you. And so my support system has been my husband, Adnan Zamir, and my father, Mr. Bazlar Serveri. I'm going to take Karen's name again. She's the artist who did this. She who did the indigenous design that you see in the background. Amazing person. She has taught me a lot, has humbled me a lot in my thinking, and I'm very gracious that she has done that. Of course, I'd like to thank Muslim Neighbor Nexus for offering us this platform to speak. And innumerable thanks and miigwech to Chief Stacey LaForme and to Sister Shahina Siddiqui for taking time out of your busy, very busy, demanding schedules to do this. 90 minutes is a lot, so I really appreciate it, 90 plus minutes. Okay, so last thing we're gonna do before signing off with our dua, one more time, the last time. If you can again pull out your device or your browser and enter in the code 9305 9382. And you will be getting a question. Let me relaunch it. And where did it go? Nine three zero five 9382. And the number one takeaway that you have gotten from this seminar, different answers I'm getting here. I love it. Stop thinking so colonial. There is a lot in common between the Indigenous and Muslim culture that we need to let go of our colonial thinking. We need to stand together. Fight colonialism. We are all in this together. Fantastic. The next question that I want to hear from you is, do you now see the long-term effects that have happened on the residential schools, from the residential schools onto our Indigenous brothers and sisters? So please enter in your answers there. I'm getting a lot of betters. So thank goodness, alhamdulillah for that. That goal is being achieved slowly and steadily. Okay, just gonna give it a few more seconds. The next question is, I now see how Islamophobia is linked to racism towards Indigenous peoples in Canada. So go ahead, enter your answers there. Okay, they're seeing it clearer now. Excellent. Okay, I'm gonna give it a few more seconds. And then second last question. I know now how to stand with the Indigenous communities. Okay, so clearly, slightly, still no idea. So I'm getting thankfully more on clearer understanding. And then the final question, this is open-ended, so please go ahead and type your answer out, that in future seminars, what you would like to know more about these aspects of Indigenous communities. So that can be anywhere about their history, their languages, beliefs and traditions, their arts, the role of the Canadian government, or specific steps towards reconciliation. Okay, so I'm getting upcoming protests and petitions, the history of the Indigenous, okay, practical opportunities to work together to combat discrimination, beliefs and traditions, along with reconciliation steps, and again, another, traditions and spiritual practices. Whoa, that's a big one. How we can improve on the exchanges of information and skill sets between our communities to move forward in this beautiful land that belongs to the Creator. Wonderful. Well, that concludes for now. So I just want to thank you again for attending the seminar. I'm going to close off with a dua that Chief Stacey Laform, just so you know, we like to present it at the end of every gathering we have. Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu anna la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayka. The translation is, all glory is to Allah, our creator. All praise is to him. All glory is to you, Allah, and all praise is to you. I testify that there is no master and creator worthy of worship but you. I seek for your forgiveness and any wrongdoing that I may have caused or any hurt. Please accept our efforts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to please you and only you. Ameen. On a personal level, if I was offensive in any way in my language, I apologize. I'm happy to hear how I can improve or otherwise. So thank you again for joining us. In Ojibwe, you can correct me, Chief Stacey Laform, they say Bama Pi Minwa Kawabmin, which actually doesn't mean goodbye, but it means see you later. So I will see you all later, inshallah, God willing. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.